Thank you so much for having me here. I already feel kind of intimidated. I think you have an incredible association, for one thing, working for you, which I've already learned a lot from. I'm really impressed that there are so many of you here on a Saturday morning, as you heard. So you're already doing something amazingly right, even to be here. I've never been to Ireland before. I've never been to Dublin before, obviously, if I haven't been to Ireland. And I've been also very impressed by the very drunk young Scots wandering around. My favorite thing I was telling everybody that I heard yesterday was one saying to another, "We've only been here for an hour. Don't get into a fight yet." And you could tell he meant it was okay to get in a fight later, but not yet. Anyway, it's very exciting to be here, and I hope that I feel nervous because you're a group of strangers, so now I feel like I've really got to come out with some. I don't think anything I say will be new. I think sometimes we spend a lot of our time thinking we have to invent a new thing, and really there's a lot of common sense in what we talk about. So my job here today is to figure out how the PowerPoint works. I'm just going to try clicking this and see what happens. Aha, look. My job is to do three things, I think. Explain a little bit more about People for Education and what we do and why we do it. A little bit about the Ontario context, just so you know where we're coming from. And then about the research that we did on what matters most. Looking at parent involvement and what parents do, and then a bit about Ontario's structures that we have, because I think what's been really interesting is talking to Anya and the people from England about the things that are the same and the things that are different, and hopefully the things we can learn from each other. So first, People for Education. We started 18 years ago, and we actually started, I should also say that I used to be a theatre director. I am not an educator. I am not an expert in education, though I've learned a lot over the last 18 years. People for Education started with a little group of parents in my children's elementary school, and we started because the principal came to us and asked us to raise money for math books. Now, principals were always coming and asking you to raise money for things, but we were very surprised and concerned about the idea of raising money for math books, for something as fundamental as that. And what did that mean to the kind of ultimate ideal of public education, which was to give every child an equitable chance for success? What did it mean in the schools where they couldn't raise money for math books? At the same time in Ontario, and this was 18, 19 years ago, there was huge fighting going on in the education system. It was kind of a battleground. There were strikes constantly. The teachers' unions were fighting with the government. The government was fighting with all the school boards. The government was cutting massive amounts of money out of the education system. And in a way, it appeared to be a battle for public education, but every discussion was a kind of polarized debate. There were only sides, and you had to pick a side, and you had to be on one or the other. And we decided it was really important that there be a group that wasn't on a side. And we actually describe ourselves that way. People for Education, we're not on a side. And that we thought it was important there be a group that would speak for the system itself. And for the ideals of public education, and for about the importance of public education as a key component of civil society. So in all, without really knowing what we were doing, we founded People for Education. As it says here, we're an independent charitable organization, so we're not connected to the school system in any way. And we bring that independent voice, and we work to ensure that public education can realize its promise. And to us, that promise is that every child, no matter where they live or what language they speak or the economic situation of their parents or their learning needs or their religion, every single child should have an equitable chance, or as equitable as we can make a chance for success. And we do our work in a number of different ways. We do provide information and support for parents. When we first started doing this, one of the people that we work with said, "It's as if the education system works on a series of secret handshakes." And our job is to let everybody know what those secret handshakes are. Because as you know, navigating the education system can be very complex, and it's a lot easier for some people than others. So it's probably easier for me, not because I'm so great, but because I have the kind of social capital to be able to figure it out, get my voice heard, prepared and get what I want. So we have a lot of information for parents, tip sheets on a number of things in different languages so that we can let everybody know what the secret handshakes are. We do a lot of research. We knew from the beginning, I think, that it wasn't enough to, even though I love having an opinion, having opinions about everything, and I come from a very opinionated family where we spent hours at the dinner table fighting over politics. And I learned from my father that, you know, I realized eventually that when he would come out with, whoa, 27% of whatever, that he was actually making up the statistic. But it always made him win, because if you could come up with a number, you could win instantly. So it wasn't enough for us to just have opinions. We needed evidence to back those opinions up. So one of the first things we did was we started to survey schools. And we just asked them to count stuff. Because what we wanted to do, and we were talking about this, we wanted to be able to describe the impact of changes to policy and funding on schools at the local level. And part of our goal was to get people to understand, you know, people think of policy, no offense to all those in government, as something that lives kind of far away and never has anything to do with you until government does something bad, then you're very mad at it. But we wanted people to understand policy has an impact. And it has a range of impacts, and that if you understand it clearly enough, not only does it affect you, but you can affect it back. But you have to have that knowledge with which to do that. So we do an annual report on schools that looks at things like libraries and music programs and special education and fundraising, things like that. And we do a lot of sort of special reports. We've looked at streaming, the practice of dividing kids when they go into what we call high school. We've looked at technology in schools, special education. And we see our part of our job as kind of bridging all the different worlds. Maybe it's a lot of bridges, because there are big gaps. So there's the parent world, there is the government world and the policymaker world, there's the world of academia where fabulous people doing fabulous research spend a lot of time writing very, very interesting papers in some special language that researchers feel they should write in so that nobody else can read what they're writing about. And the world of the public. And the public's very important in this because most people aren't directly involved in education. So how do we get the rest of the world to care about this thing? I was explaining to the visitors from England that when I tell people what I do, people who aren't involved in education, they look at me and go, oh, that's very interesting. Like, oh God, how can I get away from this woman? That sounds so dull. So part of our job is to try to bridge all those worlds and build a public conversation about public education, because again, we think it is a core component of who we are and what we do. And for us, where we start now is what kind of country do we want to live in, or what kind of province, which is what we have in Canada, or community, neighborhood, or town. And if that's the kind of place we live, then what do we need our schools to do? What's our school's role in that, in making this place where we want to live? And it's one of the reasons that perspective that we're working on an initiative which I'll describe later called Measuring What Matters. So, we start with that. What kind of country do we want to live in? But in Canada, we don't have a national education system. The country, the Canada itself has no control over kindergarten to grade 12 education. And the provinces and the territories guard this very, very hard. And they go, nope, that's our territory. It's part of our constitution that provinces run that. So oddly, we don't have that many national conversations about education. So we work in Ontario. There's Ontario, in case you can't put it anywhere in your mind. Ontario is very big. I looked it up to see how much bigger it was than Ireland, not to be mean or anything, but I went, wow, it's 15 times bigger than Ireland. It's about as big, it's a little bit bigger than France and Spain put together. So geographically, it's huge. It's very diverse. 28% of the people in Ontario are foreign-born. In some areas, in some urban areas, it's well over half of the kids in schools would have their parents would have been born somewhere other than Canada. We have 4 systems in Ontario. They're all within the public education system. So we have an English secular set of school boards, English Catholic, French secular, and French Catholic. And the Catholic and French parts are, again, because of a constitutional right to be able to go to school, either have a Catholic education or have a French language education. In Ontario, 95% of kids go to public schools, so that in itself is a sign of success. And they for the most part, they do quite well. We love those things where who's ranking highest, so Ontario schools are always somewhere in the top 10 in PISA when they break it down to provinces, and they kind of go up and down. We went down a bit in math. Somebody announced it was a national crisis. I wasn't so sure it was a national crisis, but because the points do kind of move up and down. We do have a gap, as do most countries, based on kids' socioeconomic status, but it's, compared to some places, it's relatively small, but it is something that we need to work on. In Ontario, education, so there we got the province. We got a country, no control over education, then we have the province. It's very centrally controlled by the province. So all of the funding decisions and all of the funding paid for by taxes come from the provincial level. They decide on all the big labor issues and the sort of overall negotiations with teachers' unions and support staff in schools. They decide on the curriculum. So it's quite centralized, and that was a change about 20 years ago that made that central. And one of the things it did that was important was, and people still bridle about it, but it made funding much more equitable around the province, because before funding relied on taxes, local taxes, so there were some very, very poor boards and some very, very rich boards. We don't have that anymore. Then underneath that, we have 72 school boards. And again, there's a vast difference. There are some that are just huge, but have hardly any schools. So there's one board that is, I think, nearly as big as France, but has 11 schools and 700 students. I think it's a French public board in Northern Ontario. And then we have the Toronto board, where my children went to school. It has 565 schools and 290,000 students. So we have boards that are packed that way. And then we have schools. So at the board level, they're making decisions about on-the-ground decisions about special ed, about safe schools policy, which schools to open, which schools to close. And people argue about whether or not there should be school boards. People love arguing about various aspects of education. And then at the school level, there are 5,000 schools in Ontario. They are run for the most part by the principal, and the principal implements all of the things that come down to him or her from on to high. And at each level, there is a parent body. And at the province, there's a parent engagement office, which has about $35 million and does everything to do with parent engagement. In particular, it provides grants, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. At the school board level, there are parent involvement committees, and these are mandated in law. There must be a parent involvement committee at the school board level, and every school must have a school council, and both those bodies are advisory. So I'm going to talk about the parent organizations in a minute, but first I want to get to the research that we did about parents themselves. Now, I want to preface this because I always end up talking about this and use myself and my own children as an example. Luckily, they're in a different country, so they can't hear. And I make this assumption in doing this that for everybody else, being a parent was as complex and as challenging and as it has been for me. And then I worry that everybody else is a perfect parent and you never had any problems and your children never skipped school or smoked pot or did any horrible things like that. Only my children did. But I think that part of the reason for looking at this is that we believe being a parent is a complex and challenging thing that we need to take seriously and we need to look at more and look at harder. Just the role of being a parent. I'll tell you a bad story about my mother. Which is that when I had my first child, who's now 28, I was amazed that I had a child and it didn't come with a rule book, and I talked to everybody a lot about it, and my mother meanly said to somebody else, my cousin, who told me, my mother went, you'd think she was the first person in the world ever to have a baby, and which I thought was really cruel, but in fact it feels like you are the first person in the world ever to have a baby, and it's that important, and it's that big, it's just like when this sounds so mean, but then when your parent dies, it's like you're the first person in the world that happens to it also. And it happens to everybody. Everybody's parents die unless you die before them. But it doesn't make it any less important. And it's the same with having children. Just because a lot of people do it doesn't make it easy or doesn't make you understand, you know, just innately how to do it. And certainly I didn't learn from my mother, who did lots of things wrong. Anyway, so then I did lots of things wrong too. 2 years ago, we decided to look at parent engagement because everybody talks about it so much. We have government policies to do with it. Everybody talks about we need to engage more parents. But we have a tendency to look at or engage or involve more parents. We have a tendency to always look at the parent involvement you can count. So you guys, you are the parent involvement we can count. So who's coming into the school? Who do we see? How can we count them? Great, there's more people in the school, we're a success. And we were worrying about that and going, are we missing something here? So, you know, we all know deep down inside this is about students. So what kinds of parent involvement had the biggest impact on student success? So we looked at 30 years of research from everywhere in the English-speaking world, and we looked at the research in particular that focused on the things that successful students had in common. What were the things that their parents did that seemed to make them more successful as students? And what was amazing about the research was the incredible agreement across a gazillion different researchers, and they love all being special and discovering new things, but they all just kept discovering the same thing over and over again. So it came down for us to the top 4, and there was a lot of agreement on these top 4. And these are the top 4 things that can be done by anybody: rich, poor, newcomer, university educated, not university educated. But I want to preface this with it doesn't mean just because anybody can do them that they're easy. And my preface of my preface is that our research director, who's a wonderful woman named Kelly Gallagher Mackay, and she's got a master's degree in law and a PhD in education, and we'd written this up, and she'd done all the work, and then we were writing a tip sheet, and it was going to say, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, 4. And she came in one morning in tears, literally, big, smart, grown-up woman, and she literally in tears went, we can't say it's easy, it's not easy, because she couldn't get her child dressed to go to school. And she had this huge battle with her child, and she went, we can't ever say this is easy. And it was a wonderful kind of moment, because to her, that was what she was dealing with, and she didn't know how to deal with it, and it made her late, and it made her hate her child and said terrible things to her child. So we never said it was easy. We actually say these aren't easy at all, but there are 4 of them, and they're doable. So number 1 is, and I'm sure you've all heard these things before too, but it's important to reinforce them. Number 1, everybody agreed on, was about having high expectations. So when they looked at everybody across socioeconomic status, across everything, that high expectations were the thing that made the difference. So they're about communicating your belief in your child's potential. They're not necessarily about marks, but they are about saying, I assume you're going to do well academically. I assume you're going to work hard. In this family, we care about education. In this family, we expect our kids to do work hard and be successful. So it's all within that basket. Now again, to use myself as an example, I'll always go back to the not-so-good parent. When we were writing these, my children were already out of school, but one was in first-year university, and mostly she seemed to be learning how to drink very well. And she was away at university, and I thought, what do I do with this? How do I communicate this thing to her? And I literally didn't know how, so I was talking to her on the phone one day, and I said, Katie, I just want to tell you, I have high expectations of you. And even that made a difference, actually. And I was so surprised, because she kind of went, oh. And so even if you don't know how to say it, you can just say that. And you can just keep saying it over and over again. And again, it's not about marks or fighting about the marks. It's saying, I expect this. And kids actually, no matter what they say to you, care about what you expect. Number 2 is talking about school. And again, what was surprising about this one was that more than helping with homework, more than limiting their TV time or telling them they couldn't go out on a school night, all the things you fight about, I wanted to make a tip sheet once called How to Help Your Child with Their Homework Without Killing Them, but nobody would let me. But then we learned, actually, actually helping with homework wasn't the most important thing. It was these things called home discussions. Now, those aren't necessarily easy either. You ask your kid, you know, what did you do in school today? Oh, I don't know. And how was it? Boring, or nothing. Or they won't talk to you at all as they get older. So we also made a tip sheet for teachers about how to prescribe, I was going to say, give homework to kids that actually made that conversation happen. So we said, you know, give as homework that the child has to, you know, interview their parents about these questions, because then it starts a conversation about what you did in school. I always found that the thing to do was ask who got in trouble. That was a good way to start the conversation, because they loved talking about who got in trouble, and then you could kind of slowly get it over to, you know, what did you actually do in your class. But building those, having conversations about school involves parents. It also involves the school helping you have those conversations. So the more communication you get from school, the more you can ask about field trips, about what they're learning, things like that. And we made a tip sheet for parents and for teachers and for principals. Number 3 is probably the hardest one, and I would like to say the one that I probably failed the most at. But we hadn't done this research when I brought up my children. And this one has to do with building positive attitudes and work habits. And the mean story I always tell about my older daughter is that if she had learned this, she wouldn't have to learn that when you get a job, you have to go every day, which she had to learn 3 times by getting fired 3 times. Now she has learned it. But anyway, maybe I could have helped her with these before. And these go with the social emotional skills I'm going to talk about when we talk about measuring what matters. So we can't make our children do what we want, unfortunately. It's the sad truth. But we can help them develop the good work habits and attitudes that they need in order to be able to do the things they need to do. And I think the most important thing about this is it's not about doing stuff for them. And that, I don't know about you guys, but part of the mistake that I made as a parent was wanting my children to be happy all the time and wanting to rescue them when they got into trouble. And that by doing that, I actually didn't let them learn this. I didn't let them struggle. I didn't let them learn that they could persist. I didn't let them learn that they could actually deal with challenges on their own. One of the stories I like to tell is I watched once a man and his kid in the playground, and it was a little boy who could just stand up. I don't even think he could walk. And he was trying to figure out how to pick up a ball off the ground. So he was probably 12 months old. And he kept nearly getting the ball, and then he'd fall back down. And he would nearly get the ball, and he would fall back down. And the dad just stood there and watched him until finally he got the ball and he stood up. And I wanted to run over, but I was worried the dad would think I was insane, and go, "That was magnificent parenting on your part." Because I think that when my children were young, I would have picked up the ball for them. And that inclination to pick up the ball in whatever way is the thing that doesn't allow our kids to learn how to, again, persist, to ask for help, to deal with a sort of crisis of confidence. They don't learn the consequences of not doing things. And they don't learn how to deal with difficulty, learn how to deal with conflict, how to handle distractions. They need to learn those things on their own. And they need to learn them from the very, very beginning. My poor children, but when Katie, my younger daughter, who learned to drink in first year university, when she was in kindergarten, and she was a very eccentric, lovely child, her kindergarten teacher came to me and said, "You know, things would be a lot better if Katie would just learn to put her coat on." And I thought she was being really mean. And I thought, God, how could you be so impatient? Because for me, Katie was always so distracted. And you could never really get her to do anything because she lived in her own world. So for me, it was like, you don't understand, she would never go to school if I didn't put her coat on. And so I kept on putting her coat on, and metaphorically speaking, all the way through school. And I think that it didn't help her. So I think that, again, it's remembering that from when they're very, very little. And these are the things that build the social emotional skills that make a difference to all learning and to their success as grown-ups. And the last one is about reading together, which I'm sure you've heard a million times. But this is not about teaching kids to read. It's not about making them sound out words. It's not about making reading not fun. It's about making reading fun. And for me, you can keep on reading to kids way after they've learned how to read. They like it. And it can be in any language, and it makes a difference in the long run in all of their learning. If there's a short video, this will be a miracle if this works. But I think it's going to. Ooh, it is.
You can't go out.
Only 1 hour of TV.
Is
That's
your homework
it.
done?
Sit down now. I'll help you with your
Not
homework.
on a school night.
We've all been there, micromanaging, monitoring their activities, helping with homework. But guess what? These are not the things that will make the biggest difference in your kids' academic success. So what does work? People for Education knows. After sifting through 30 years of research from around the world, they have extracted the most important lessons for success. First, have high expectations. Let your kids know you expect them to do well, that you believe in them, and that their education matters.
So try this.
If you work hard, I know you can do well.
How do you think you can improve next time? I think you can do even better.
In our family, we care about school.
55 studies have looked at the lives of 300,000 kids, and guess what? High expectations deliver, more than drilling them with flashcards or helping them with homework. Number 2, talk about school. It sounds obvious, but don't just ask how was school today. Be specific. Let them strut their stuff. They love it when they feel smarter than you.
Try this instead.
So what was it like dissecting a frog?
Have you thought about what courses you might want to take next year?
Did you get to go outside for recess today?
A study of over 25,000 U.S. grade 8 students found that talking to your kids about school has a bigger impact than limiting TV time or how often they go out during the week. Number 3, help your kids develop good work habits and a positive attitude. Help shape their work habits and planning. Encourage them to ask for help when they need it, and help them navigate a world full of distractions.
So try this.
Your persistence paid off. I knew you could do it.
That's so great that you knew to get help when those girls called you names.
We all find some things hard, but I know you can work through this.
I can see you feel really bad about the mark on that test. What do you think you could do differently next time?
So help your kids develop a positive attitude and good work habits. The research shows it's more important than focusing on test scores. Number 4, read together. Reading is the foundation for education. So grab a book and read together often.
So try this.
Let's sit down and cuddle with your sister and read.
This book is great. What do you think will happen next?
You should read this book when I'm finished. I think you'll love it.
Studies show that when parents read to kids at 5, they are more likely to love reading and do better in math and spelling by the time they're 16. So remember, it's important to read to your kids for fun rather than focusing on phonics. School and homework is a challenge for children and for parents. Your job is to support achievement, so don't be a homework policeman or a substitute teacher. Instead, tell them you expect that they will work hard and do their best. Talk with them about school. Help them develop good work habits, to persist even when the going gets tough, and encourage them to love reading. So talk with your kids and leave the nagging and micromanaging behind. You're more likely to have a successful student and a great atmosphere at home.
Yeah. So when we did that study and put out that information, we were talking to the head of the Ontario Principals Council about it. I feel like I'm way louder now too. I'm very, very loud. And what he said, he went, this is so interesting. So really what you're saying is that there's too much teaching at home and too much parenting at school. And I think that put it perfectly. So it had to do with reminding parents that you're not there to be a teacher, but you do have this incredible other job. So for us, again, it's partly about recognizing the seriousness of this role and then developing structures and policies that help support that, that help parents at home do what matters most. And parents, sometimes we end up, this doesn't seem incredibly loud, it just seems loud to me. We end up giving parents lots more work to do, and I don't think parents actually want more work, but they do want information support, things that are easy, things that they can do at home. So knowing that, then, when we look at the structures that we put in place, it's important to remember that, and it's interesting where the gaps are. So I'm going to try and quickly go through what it looks like in Ontario, which bears some similarity to here, except every one of your schools in Ireland has its own, what we would call a school board, and you call a board of management. So At the school level, every school has a school council. The majority of school councils are parents. They can have a community member. They have to have a principal. They have to have a teacher on that school council. And their job is to be advisory. So they're not there to tell anybody what they're to do. They're there to give advice. And each school council gets money. And I'm going to talk about money at the end because I think actually money is an important part in this. Their purpose, as stated in legislation, so these are legislative bodies, is to improve student achievement and enhance accountability of the education system to parents. But interestingly, it's not stated that their purpose is to communicate with parents or to help parents navigate the system. So it's to improve student achievement, but it doesn't describe specifically anywhere in the policy this other sort of piece of what would be helpful for parents. We surveyed all the school councils in Ontario, about 900 of them responded, and we asked them what they thought their most important role was, and we gave them some things to select from. And the top role that was chosen was communication. And student achievement, oddly enough, was way down the list. They felt that the biggest part, the most important role they had was to be able to communicate out. Now, we also asked them what they spent the most time on. They all said fundraising. So there is a kind of a gap there, too. They worried, all of them, which I'm sure you have similar issues, they worried that they couldn't get more parents to come to meetings. Again, I'll use my mother as an example of this. Now, my mother, we moved really a lot when I was a kid. And my mother wrote letters home. My father was in mining. My mother wrote letters home to her parents and to my father's parents, and I was reading them not that long ago because they kept them because they were great letters. And she wrote a letter home in 1959, literally, I'm not making this up, and she was talking about the PTA. And she was going, you know, I've just come back from a PTA meeting and it was so annoying. They spent their whole time talking about why more parents didn't come to meetings and fighting about fundraising. And I thought, whoa, in 1959 they were talking about this, and in 2014 they're still talking about this. And one of the things that we know, because we've been tracking it for a number of years, is that it's never changed. The number of people come to meetings, the average is always 10, it's stayed 10 no matter what. In some schools it's way more, but 10 seems to be the average. The other things that they struggled with was they felt that a lot of things were expected of them, working on the school improvement plan, improving student achievement, all of these other things, and they had a hard time getting to that. And they also felt, because there was a turnover, that they were inexperienced, that they lacked the experience to get at it, and also that it kind of relied on the hero parent. So you could have a school council that was incredibly functional, doing amazing things, but really because there was one, you know, I was going to say bossy, but that's mean. But there was one particularly driven person who was really making it happen, and then the driven person graduates and goes off to high school, and then down goes the school council again. So and the other parts are the disconnect between what they see as their role and what they spent the most time on. So for us in Ontario, we really feel it's time to actually adjust the policy so that it articulates what's important, it names what they should or could be doing, and it also values the work that schools councils are saying they want to do. So for us, what that is that communication piece, so that even if I never come to the school, it does not mean I'm a bad parent, it does not mean I'm not engaged, but even if I never come to the school, that because the school council or the parent council is doing this, I feel I'm part of the school community. And feeling part of the school community is very, very important. And also I'm getting the information, I'm learning the top 4 things I can do as a parent, and I never have to turn up at the door, somebody's told me that. Then at the next level up, we have school boards. Again, school boards get given the money by the province to run the systems. There are 72 of them. Each one of those has a parent involvement committee. They're relatively new in Ontario. They've been around for about the last 7 years, and they're just finding their feet. They're actually getting better at doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is to support, encourage, and enhance parent engagement. They're supposed to provide information to parents, act as a kind of conduit from the Ministry of Education down to parents, and to help the board, school boards figure out how they communicate with parents. So their job is communication. The tension arrived in some places where they went, we're on the parent involvement committee, we want to run the board, thank you very much. And the board kept going, no, that's not your job. So this kind of balance between having a say, being advisory rather than having some, real jurisdiction is sometimes problematic in that way. It's interesting that actually at the Parent Involvement Committee level, they do talk about helping parents support their child's learning at home, but they don't talk about it at the school council level. And they also are there to oversee funding. So they get a bunch of money, as you can see. They get $5,000 a year plus 17 cents a student. And for some boards that are really big, that can be as much as $50,000. That's about 36,500 euros. So they have money to do things with. When we surveyed them, they said their successes were providing a parent voice at the board level. We're bringing together parents, as you are today, from the school level to learn from each other and share resources and information. So they saw that bringing together aspect of their work as incredibly important, and I think it is from you guys today. The challenges were the same as the school council ones: recruiting and maintaining members. Some of them were already saying they had a very hard time, because really, in a way, you end up with the same parents that are on school councils, on parent involvement committees, and how many times can you use up that one parent? Not that many. And that they lacked a system to communicate. So at school councils and at the parent involvement committee level, both bodies complained ardently, some of them, about not being given access to parents. And this is partly given as an issue about privacy. But I think if you ask parents, and if somebody lets you go and really ask them, would you like to have more information about what's going on in your kid's school? They would all say yes. But many principals at the school council level guard the email addresses of parents, and they won't let the school councils have them. Same problem at the parent involvement committee level. They went, can't you please let us talk? But they don't have access to the actual parents on the ground. So they have similar challenges, and they have similar challenges in terms of the lack of diversity. So school councils and parent involvement committees struggle with the fact that for the most part, the people that are on them look and sound like me, and probably like most of you. So they are middle-class parents, parents with some university education, parents who know how to get involved in the system. And some of them argued there shouldn't be so much school board control, but other ones didn't mind so much. Now I'm going to get to the money, and then I'm going to get to measuring what matters. What Ontario has done that is, I think, incredibly successful is that they developed these things called parent reaching out grants. So, and what these are based on is the idea that you know at your local level what would really help. And there's money to be had in Ontario. So you can apply for a grant, you have to fill in a form, it has to be based on sort of removing barriers for parents or helping more parents access the education system or help their kids be successful in the system. And they provide $1,000, 750 euros per school council if you're successful, which most are. Or at the regional level, $30,000, and that usually involves bringing people together to talk. And the province provides about $2 million a year for these grants, and these have been extraordinary in their impact, because suddenly then you have a school council at the local level concentrating intentionally on how are we going to talk to that group of parents we never see or we don't know. How are we going to make sure that, that any kidder came all the way from Canada and said there were 4 things you should do? How can we let everybody in our school community know that? And these grants have been supporting that kind of work. So the most common things people do with them are about parenting skills, about supporting well-being, supporting literacy and math programs, supporting access, or I'm zooming through these. So skills so the well-being is the first one: nutrition, bullying, technology, mental health. The second one is to do with things like literacy and math, how to support your student in those areas, because the province likes literacy and math a lot. The third one is access, so for translation, for bringing in, for hiring interpreters. The fourth one is for transition, so how to help parents help their kids through coming first into school, going to, in Ontario we stupidly have something called middle school, so first you're in early education, then you're in kindergarten to grade 6, then you go to another school for 2 years, and then you go to high school. How do you help them through all those transitions? And a slide that I forgot to make is the 5th one, which is about homeschool community partnerships, and I think that that's very interesting for the work that you're doing here, that people have been getting grants in order to build the communication sort of across those lines. The grants are very popular. They allow parents to choose what they want to do, as I said. And they allow parents to think about what's going to make a difference in my community or in my region. So for me, the kind of overall message in the research and in what we've done in Ontario is to be careful of, again, the focus on the parent involvement that you can count, and pay attention to that other kind of parent involvement that's harder to count, harder to see, but probably more important. I went a while ago and made a presentation to a lot of principals, and I was telling this to them. They really wanted me to tell them this is how you get parents involved in the school, and then I cheated and didn't. I said, this is what's really important that parents do, and they listened, kind of annoyedly. And then one of them came up to me afterwards, and I'd said, oh, this is all the research, this is what it all shows, and he came up afterwards and he went, yeah, that's really great, thank you very much, but what about high school? How do we get parents engaged in high school? High school parents are just not engaged at all. And I still had a child in high school at that point, and it made me so angry because I was really engaged with my child, not always fun. And I'll tell my favorite parent-teacher interview story about that child, which is that I went, I'm sorry, this is a total aside, but anyway, I was engaged in her education. I just wasn't at school necessarily. I went to a parent-teacher interview, and at high school you go and line up for the different teachers, and it was the geography teacher, who I knew my child didn't like. Anyway, I finally got to the head of the line, and I said, hello, I'm Molly's mother. And she went, oh, Molly. Molly is so wonderful, and she does this, and she does that. And when people praise your child, you know it's because you're a good parent, right? It's like, it must be fantastic. And she went on and on and on about Molly, and I'm just feeling so pleased. And then I said something about Molly, and she went, oh, that Molly. And I just went, oh, no. And then, of course, I knew I was a terrible parent, because that Molly had skipped school that day. I wasn't there at all. So when the principal came to complain to me about high school parents who weren't engaged, I was kind of shaking, and I went, look, I don't go to anything else. I go to the concerts at high school, I go to the parent-teacher interviews. Otherwise, I'm never there. But I am engaged, and I am engaged as a parent. And it did really upset me, because being a parent at that point was feeling very difficult. So the other overarching piece in this is that when we're looking at all these things we do, and Anya was talking about this yesterday, and I know you've been talking about it in Ireland, what's important is why, and how do we measure our success in what we're doing? And and how do we know when we're doing well? So when we look at all of these policies and all of these new ideas of how we can engage parents and how we're working with parents and what are parents doing and how can we build stronger partnerships, how do we measure success? And right now, for the most part, in most of the world, we measure success based on literacy and numeracy scores, because that's what we have. So we go, we're doing this, and look, we can see the impact, because the scores went up in reading or writing and math. And reading and writing and math are incredibly important. But by only using those as our only measures of success, and by focusing so much on those things, it's kind of narrowed our definition of education. And it's actually hard then to build in the time and the breathing room and the policy room to do the other stuff that we know is important. So I think that as you're moving forward here, and for us as we're moving forward in Ontario, we want to have more things. We don't want to add more kinds of tests, but broader goals and more things, a broader set of measures, so that we're really measuring what matters. So that we're trying to figure out right now in Ontario how we change what we measure. And this is the last thing that I'll talk about. How much time do I have? Oh, fantastic. It depends on how many stories I tell about my poor children. I could tell you many more. So we did a lot of research, and we looked at what all of the experts all across the world were saying about what were the foundational things that made a difference to student success. And everybody says literacy and numeracy, absolutely. Nobody says those things aren't important. But what's interesting is that they say there is a foundational set of skills or competencies that come before that, or that all kids need to have to kind of build from. And they're the skills that we need to ensure that kids can learn, that they can keep on learning. We know we live in this incredible changing world. We're all struggling with the knowledge economy, that training kids in one kind of skill when they're in high school or in elementary school is not necessarily going to serve them well when they're out there in the world. So employers are saying different competencies and skills. I heard a great quote once from a guy from Denmark who talked about, he drew a circle and described these other kinds of skills, and he said, these are the skills, in the center he put, that get you hired, and these, which are the ones I'm going to talk about, these other ones are the ones that get you fired. And I thought that was a good way of putting it too, if I use my daughter again as an example. Those were the skills she didn't have that got her fired. So our goal is, what are the competencies that all students need to grow up to be happy, to be healthy, to live civically engaged lives, to be economically secure, and to be citizens in the world. And interestingly, a lot of them go with all those things we talked about that are the important things that parents do. But they're not things you're just born with. They're not, I have these character attributes that just make me the fabulous person I am. They're skills, they're teachable, they're learnable. Parents can work on them, but schools can work on them too. So they came down to 4. Oh, look, this feels like a miracle to me. I never use PowerPoint. And the first one was creativity and innovation. Creativity and innovation has millions of things inside it. Yes, it's about the arts, but it's also about critical thinking. It's about being able to imagine a problem first, being able to figure out how you could possibly work on that problem, how you could possibly find a solution, being able to look back critically at every step. Where isn't working? Where is it working? How can I change it? And it applies from everywhere, all the way through the arts, through science, through technology. What was interesting about these was we got these experts together to work on this, and that they'd never talked to each other before. And once they started talking to each other, they were so excited, because it's like, whoa, that's important in citizenship, that's the same thing as important in creativity. So they learned, they started to learn more too about what were these foundational competencies. We have had big arguments about whether they're called competencies or skills, and I know there's a difference, but to me, out there in the world, competencies doesn't even sound like a real word. Anyway, so I like calling them skills, but they actually are competencies. In citizenship, this was also very interesting, because citizenship, partly, one of the person who wrote about citizenship for us is this incredibly passionate man. He's hilarious. And he says every education system pays lip service to the idea of citizenship and how important it is, but nobody really does anything about it. So part of it is knowledge, part of it is just, do you know how your government works? Do you know, what it means to, how all of the processes work up and down? But the other part is the capacity to be an engaged citizen, and that starts in school. So do schools support students having a voice? Do schools support kids learning what it is to think, there's a problem here, I think I have a solution, I know how to bring it forward. So it's partly about, which I'll talk at the end, about the quality of the learning environment itself. How are we building those skills in kids? In Canada, in the 1980s, I think 89% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted. Now 39% do. And even that is a very bad sign of how young people feel about even just that one indication of what it means to be an engaged citizen. The other area, of course, is health. One of my favorite quotes I ever heard, I was talking to a man who was a kinesiology professor, and he was talking about the importance of health, physical health and mental health. And he finally went, here's the thing. Who cares if little Johnny can read or write if he's going to be dead by the time he's 35? And I thought, what a good point. This is and it's a good way of thinking of it, that health actually matters all the way through, and it matters when you're in school. It actually helps you do better in school, be engaged in school, and again, do better in all ways. The broadest one, which I talked a lot about in the parent piece, is social emotional skills. And again, these are not things you're born with. Part of the difficulty of this is that because they're called social and emotional or non-cognitive or soft, they sound kind of not important, or we'll get to those if we can. But in fact, they ground everything. So partly they're the things we work on at home, but they need to be worked on at school. So they include self-management, planning, setting goals, managing stress, self-awareness, understanding your emotions and feelings. And I'm sorry I didn't make a slide for this, but I ran out of slide time because I hadn't done my homework and I knew I was going to get in trouble. That is where my children learned. Social awareness, which has to do with empathy, taking other people's perspectives into account, which is a huge part of citizenship too. It's very important to understand. Our citizenship guy went, citizenship is not about everybody getting along, it's about learning how to disagree. So being able to understand somebody else's perspective, take that into account, make your argument back, not feel that you have to, beat them to death in order to win. Interpersonal relationship skills, speaking of beating to death, this is kids' capacity to develop friendships, to deal with conflict, to resist negative social pressures. Decision-making skills, one that I have never learned, how to solve problems, how to use your own kind of moral and ethical and personal standards to make decisions. All of those pieces go into how kids are able to learn and keep learning. And what we don't want to do is say that any of these things make you better at math or reading and writing, because therein lies, it's a bad path when you go down that route. I come from the arts. The arts has spent years saying music is important because it makes you better at math, which A, is not really that true, and B, denigrates the arts themselves, which are incredibly important for all the things they do for human beings, not necessarily because they make them better at math. So these foundational skills make you better at everything. They make you better at being a human being, being able to work, to live, to get along, and to get a job. And as I've said about my children, now that they're old, I realize as a parent, getting a job is really important because you really care whether they have jobs. Underneath all of that, and that is partly what you guys are talking about too, so I'm very excited by the work that you're doing here, is the quality of the learning environment itself. And again, because we don't measure these things, because we don't look at it and go, okay, here are the points where maybe we could measure this. So that's about partnerships, that's about all of the interactions in the school, inside the classroom, between classrooms, between teachers and the principal, between teachers and the principal and parents, between the school and the school community. So how is that whole school environment working, and how is it supporting then all these other skills? And we have the hard part about this, trying to measure what matters, is that education itself is very complex, and we love simple things. So we love to be able to look in the paper and see the graph. Up good, down bad. Great, we know everything we need to know about education, but of course we don't from that graph. But we're kind of stuck with that right now. We're stuck with it all over the world. We have various forms of league tables. We have various forms of this is how we're going to judge the success of your school. In the United States, they're saying this is how we're going to judge the success of teachers, is based on literacy and numeracy scores. Now again, literacy and numeracy incredibly important, but it's important that we pay attention to the whole system, that we set goals, real, measurable, doable goals in all those areas, and that we come to some agreement on how to measure them. And we're now talking to people all over Canada and all over the world about how we do that. And is there some kind of way of balancing how we look at it locally with how we look at it, so that it's sort of from the bottom up and from on the high. Perfect, because look, I'm finished. Ta-da! So that for us is important in everything that we do. So everything that we do to do with parents and to do with schools, part of it is we have to think about why we're doing it, what's our purpose, and how we're measuring success. And if we keep just sticking with, did the math scores go up, we're not actually going to be giving our children a good enough education in order to allow them to be successful in their whole lives. So thank you very much. That is us, and thank you.